Hello, everybody. Happy holidays. Well, that time of the year is almost upon us, the holiday season. And in addition, one of those times of year that happens a few times a year is almost upon us too. And what I'm actually talking about is that thing that everybody likes to give a really bad reputation to. And that is Mercury retrograde. I'd like to talk in a moment about how, really Mercury retrograde is actually a really good thing. But first, just so you know, Mercury will station and turn retrograde at 10:55 a.m. UK time. If you want to find out what time that is in your particular time zone, please go to timeanddate.com or anywhere else on the internet that gives those particular references. So Mercury will station retrograde and continue in its retrograde cycle until the 8th of January, where it will station direct, and then move forward for a few weeks until it goes back over the degree that it went retrograde at, and that's called Mercury going over its shadow. Generally, that period of time from the retrogradation, from Mercury stationing and going retrograde until it goes back over its shadow, is spent more in review and going back over old ground and then beginning to make a little bit of progress based upon what one has been integrating over that time before one begins to move onward for things. That's how Mercury retrograde periods really tend to function. So let's talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde before we get into some of the specifics about this particular cycle. When Mercury is retrograde, it's more internalized, and I'm going to kind of go a little more deep with that particular subject. So rather than being quite as analytical and trying to think and come up with answers and being more active-minded, it's a time when we're meant to be more reflective, where we're meant to kind of go back over old ground, where we're meant to get clear about things, reflect about things. And reflection is very necessary. And the reason that Mercury retrograde gets such a bad reputation is, we're a very action-oriented society, this world society. We need constant action, constant movement. When things are associated with economy, we're always looking for things to move forward. But, things can't always move forward. And if they were always moving forward, you'd get exhausted pretty quickly. So we need those times of slowing down and going back inside of ourselves on those particular levels in order to kind of get clear about things. Why don't we like them? Well, some of us do like them, but I think that the main reason that people don't like those particular times is they don't feel like things are moving forward. But really, that's just an illusion, because there's quite a lot of progress that's being made. But it's just meant to be a time where you're being more reflective, rather than being more always actively thinking in your mind. It's not that you're not actively thinking in your mind, it's just that your active thought processes are more reflective. Now, this particular Mercury retrograde cycle is going to be taking place for the most part in Porva Ashadha nakshatra. Then the 1st of January, right on the new year, Mercury will retrograde back into Mula nakshatra, where it will continue on through the 8th, and then when Mercury stations and goes direct, it will still be in Mula Nakshatra until the 16th of January, when it will shift back into Purva Ashadha Nakshatra, and then finally go over its shadow, the point that it went retrograde at. So let's talk a little bit about the processes that are connected with that. Let's connect with Purva Ashadha a little bit first. Purva Ashadha, one of the key processes that happens with this particular nakshatra is, I like to say, a peeling away of the hubris, right? And many people may not know what that is. Think of hubris are like the false layers, or our superficiality, or our ego, right? And quite often, especially in our modern society, we get into these scenarios of thinking that we have to act a certain way, project a certain appearance, stay strong, don't let people know you're vulnerable, and just really kind of project this thing that we're not really, and it's hard, because we kind of get fed this, line of, I'm going to say it, BS about how, we always have to sell ourselves, right? And it's not so much about selling yourself, it's about being yourself. And these cycles continue for so long in our life till we get to the level where we begin to believe our own projection, so to speak. And we're not really sure of who we are. And we're not really sure of where our heart is, right? And that's a pretty confusing place to be. And when Mercury first begins its retrograde cycle, in Porva Ashadha, Venus, which is the supportive planet of Purva Ashadha, is going to be in Shatabisha Nakshatra. And that can make the process a little bit confusing. I'm going to go a little more deeply with that. But let's go back to Purva Ashadha. So Purva Ashadha peels away those layers of the ego. It gets rid of that superficiality. When that superficiality is there, somewhere beneath the surface, sometimes buried really deeply, especially in this modern world, is the true authentic self that is in a completely different headspace. And so when we go through those processes, dependent and to the extent of the depth that we go through those processes, when we come out the other side, we feel invigorated. And that's the power of Porva Ashadha Nakshatra. It gives the power of invigoration. But the way that invigoration happens is by all the layers of the ego, or as many layers as we can wash off in one particular processing session, so to speak, get washed away. And Porva Ashadha Nakshatra is connected to Apas, who is a water deity. And so it's about cleansing and invigorating, but really what's happening is you're getting rid of layers of the ego. And so with this particular Mercury retrograde period, there's a feeling inside of each of us that we're not really clear about what we feel about something or where we are at about something. In addition, there's also a specific tonality of not really knowing what we want. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we want something because, hey, I should want this, shouldn't I? Right? Everybody else tells me I should want this. And everybody else seems to have this, so I should want this, regardless of whether that's a physical thing, regardless of whether that's getting married, when maybe getting married isn't the right thing for you, regardless of whether it's having children, when maybe having children isn't the right thing for you. We tend to think that we should want something, right? And somewhere in each of our lives, there's a particular process going on with this specific Mercury retrograde period, where it's about becoming clear about what it is that you really want by taking a very deep, good, authentic look at yourself, right? And sometimes we go through these processes, kind of jumping ahead, where we think that we want something and we act on the impulse that we want something or should want something and push and push and push to try to get it and bring all sorts of confusion, chaos, difficulty, all these things that we don't want in our life. And we start getting really angry at the universe or angry at God, dependent upon what you call it, going, why isn't this working out? This should really be working out in my life, and it's just not working out. Right? Well, why is it not working out? It's not really meant to. And, sometimes we think that we're being, given a hard time by the universe, and actually we're being helped out. Right? And somewhere over this several week period, you may come to an understanding about that. I want to help you out by going, you know what, start taking a look ahead of time at the very beginning of this Mercury retrograde cycle. Get clear about what's in your heart, right? At the same time that all this is happening, Jupiter, especially even on the day that Mercury is stationing retrograde, Jupiter is forming an angle with Mercury. Jupiter's in Chitra Nakshatra. At the very beginning of the cycle, I think I said Venus would be in Shatabishak Nakshatra, but I was actually wrong, so let's correct that. Venus will be in Dhanishta Nakshatra, then it'll go into Shatabishak Nakshatra. Both of those nakshatras are connected to Mars. It's Mars that'll be in Shatabishak Nakshatra. Sorry about that. And so basically, with Chitra Nakshatra, Chitra quite often is about what's in your heart. Where is your heart in relation to things, right? Shatabishak Nakshatra takes us through many times confusion, because we have to go many times on a quest so we learn more about ourselves. It's not really going to work just being told, oh, this is where you're at. You have to experience it for yourself. And that's the processes of Shatabishak Nakshatra, right? So, just correcting myself again, Venus is in Dhanishta and Jupiter is in Chitra. Now, with Chitra Nakshatra, when Mars isn't really, kind of booming, so to speak, and it's going to be a little bit compromised during this particular cycle, when Mars isn't so booming, quite often we think that we want something and we go on a journey trying to get it, only to find that that's not really where our heart is. That's good on a certain level because we do learn about where our heart is, right? And eventually, with that knowledge and with that wisdom, we can either ignore it or we can integrate it and do something with it. That's the advice that I would give you, because when you get to around the 1st of January and Mercury is beginning to go back through Mula Nakshatra, there can be a lot of senseless struggle of trying to push up against resistance without really recognizing that that resistance is likely there for a very good reason. And it's probably better to be aware of the reason that it's there for, right? So especially between the 1st and the 8th, you may find yourself struggling, wondering why things are not really going the way that you want them to go. And maybe around the 16th when, and maybe even a little bit before, hopefully that happens, because if you do the homework ahead of time, you become clearer ahead of time. But around the 16th, when Mercury goes back into Porva Ashadha, you should begin to be getting a deeper sense of clarity in relation to this, dependent upon where planets are falling in your chart, right? And we'll talk more about that later. So really, this whole Mercury retrograde process is about getting clear about yourself. It's about going, what is it that I really do want? Where does my heart truly lie with something? And if that's really where I am, right, why do I pretend to be into doing things or wanting things or inviting things into my life that don't bring me any level of inspiration or any level of happiness? Why do I do that to myself rather than just being honest with myself? So at this particular holiday season and this particular Mercury retrograde process, which is going to start 2 days before the solstice, 2 days before the solstice, that day where it's the darkest. And then on that day that it's the darkest, we have the opportunity to really, truly reflect with this Mercury retrograde period on where we are really at, what we really want, where our heart really lies. And if you haven't had a good heart-to-heart conversation with your heart recently, now is a really good time to do so. So use this process wisely. This is what Mercury retrograde is meant for, right? Sure, it may not be bringing all those wonderful external things into your life, right? But it's bringing a lot of really good internal things into your life. And while we're on that subject, some of those myths about Mercury retrograde are not really valid. I have found Mercury retrograde periods to be really good for signing contracts. A lot of times that I have done the most enjoyable travel in my life has been during Mercury retrograde periods, right? So it really depends on the individual. But, back about this particular Mercury retrograde period collectively. It's a good time for reflection. It's a good time for getting clear about you, where you really are, seeing things from a wider perspective, rather than pretending, being true, being authentic, and being clear. If you'd like to know a little bit more about where this particular Mercury retrograde cycle will be transiting in your particular horoscope, please do feel free to schedule an astrological consultation with me. You can do so through one of the links below on this very video. In addition, if you've closed that down already, there's a link further down the page. That's going to do it for a look at Mercury retrograde in Porva Ashadha Nakshatra, starting on the 19th of December, 2016. Until next time, please do take the very best care of yourself. Bye now.